On the afternoon of the 14th of October, 1973, in the Memorial Gymnasium of Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee, 120 direct descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the founder of what was, in his lifetime, the largest single private fortune in the history of the United States, gathered for the first family reunion the dynasty had ever held. The reunion had been organized by a great-great-granddaughter who had spent 2 years tracking down the surviving members of the line. The location was Vanderbilt University, because it was the only Vanderbilt-named institution any of them could still afford to enter without paying admission. Among the 120 descendants in the gymnasium that afternoon, by the family's own internal census, there was not a single millionaire. There was not a single owner of a Newport cottage, a Fifth Avenue mansion, a private railcar, or a Hudson River steamship. The combined liquid net worth of all 120 Vanderbilts in the room, by the reunion organizers' confidential 1,974 estimate, was approximately $12 million divided among 120 households. How does a single American family go, in 96 years, from owning approximately $1 out of every $9 in the United States economy, a fortune equivalent, in modern purchasing power terms, to roughly $200 billion to a family reunion at which the most prosperous attendee is a Manhattan dentist? And how does it happen not through war, not through revolution, not through confiscation by any government, but through the operational decisions of the founder's own children and grandchildren, made in conditions of unbroken peace? The fortune belonged to Cornelius Vanderbilt, known throughout his lifetime as the Commodore, who died on the 4th of January, 1877, in his bedroom at 10 Washington Place in Manhattan, leaving, by the executed will, of the 9th of January, 1875, approximately $100 million in personal assets, the controlling shareholdings of the New York Central Railroad, the Hudson River Railroad, the New York and Harlem Railroad, and the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railway. The fortune doubled under his eldest son in the next 8 years. It would be, by 1883, approximately $200 million, the largest single private fortune any American had ever held. In the next 40 minutes, you will learn 3 things the Vanderbilt family has spent a century arranging the public record around. The exact contents of the codicil Cornelius Vanderbilt added to his will on the 8th of November, 1876, 8 weeks before his death, that disinherited every child except his eldest son, William Henry. The architectural cost of the single Newport cottage that, in 2 summers between 1893 and 1895, consumed approximately 7% of the entire Vanderbilt fortune. And the specific evening in March 1925, when a 36-year-old grandson of the Commodore, broken by gambling debts in a Park Avenue apartment, made the financial decision that ended the principal Vanderbilt branch of the family permanently. This is not a story about bad luck. It is a story about what happens to a fortune when the second generation believes the first generation built it for them to spend. Hold one image in your mind: a 70-room marble cottage on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island, completed in the summer of 1895, at a construction cost of $11 million. The cottage will be lived in by its original owners for an average of 10 weeks per year. It will be sold by the family in 1972 for $1. Remember the dollar, we will return to it. In the spring of 1810, a 16-year-old farm boy from Stapleton, Staten Island, walked into his mother's kitchen in a wood-frame house overlooking the Narrows and asked her for a loan of $100. He had not finished elementary school. He could read with effort. He could not, by his own later admission to a New York Times reporter in 1859, write a complete sentence in cursive script without assistance. He had been working since age 11 on his father's 2-mast perioga, ferrying produce across the harbor from Staten Island to the Battery for sale at the Manhattan markets. His mother, Phoebe Hand Vanderbilt, was 43 years old. She kept the family's savings in a stoneware jar buried beneath a flagstone in the kitchen floor. She extracted, by Cornelius's own account in the 1859 interview, exactly $100 in silver. She extracted it on one condition: that her son plow, harrow, and plant the family's 8-acre upper field with corn before her birthday on May 1. He was given 30 days. He was 16 years old. He had no horse. He hired 3 neighborhood boys, paid them out of his ferry earnings, plowed the field in 28 days, and presented his mother with a planted cornfield on the 30th of April, 1810. She handed him the silver. He used the $100 to purchase a single-mast periauger, a flat-bottomed sailing vessel of approximately 25 feet, and on the 2nd of May, 1810, he opened a passenger ferry service between Stapleton and the Whitehall Street slip in Lower Manhattan. He charged 18 cents per passenger. By the end of his first year of operation, he had cleared $1,000 in profit. He repaid his mother. He kept operating. By 1812, when the war with Britain closed New York Harbor to most commercial traffic, he had 4 periaugers and a contract with the United States Army to supply the 6 fortifications around New York Harbor. He was 18 years old. The contract paid him, by Army quartermaster records, approximately $9,000 per year, equivalent to roughly $240,000 in modern purchasing power. He had been in business, on his own account, for less than 3 years. By 1818, he had moved into steamships. By 1840, he had crossed paths with, and personally beaten in commercial competition, every significant Hudson River shipping operator of the period, including Robert Livingston's monopoly heirs and the Stevens family of Hoboken. By 1862, at the age of 68, he had abandoned shipping entirely for railroads. The man, in his own assessment quoted in the New York Tribune of the 22nd of January 1864, did not pivot. He acquired. Between 1862 and 1869, Cornelius Vanderbilt assembled what was, by every credible historical accounting, the single most consequential private monopoly in 19th-century American transportation. In 1862, he acquired the New York and Harlem Railroad, the only rail line that ran the length of Manhattan Island from the southern tip up the spine to Westchester County and beyond. The acquisition was, by T.J. Stiles's reconstruction in the first Tycoon, -2009, executed through a sequence of 3 coordinated stock corner operations that destroyed 2 of the most aggressive short-selling syndicates on Wall Street, including a syndicate organized personally by the New York City Common Council to manipulate the stock down. Vanderbilt bought every share they short-sold. He cornered the float. The Common Council short sellers, among them several sitting aldermen, paid him collectively approximately $7 million to settle their positions. In 1864, he acquired the Hudson River Railroad, the only rail line running the length of the Hudson Valley from Manhattan to Albany, by the same corner and squeeze technique. Final cost to him, approximately $2 million. Final corporate control, complete. In 1869, he negotiated and executed the merger of the New York and Harlem, the Hudson River Railroad, and the New York Central, a Buffalo to Albany line whose owners had refused, in February 1867, to accept Hudson River freight cars at the Albany interchange. Vanderbilt's response had been to suspend, on the 14th of January, 1867, all New York to Albany passenger and freight service operated by the Hudson River line. The New York Central capitulated within 46 days. The merger closed in 1869. The combined entity, renamed the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, controlled the only continuous rail route between New York City and the Great Lakes Industrial Corridor. By 1873, the Commodore's personal shareholdings in the consolidated entity were worth, by the contemporary Wall Street estimates that survive in the Henry Clews papers at the New York Historical Society, approximately $87 million. His other holdings, Lake Shore and Michigan Southern, the Canada Southern Railway, the Michigan Central Railroad, his Manhattan real estate, his cash reserves at the Bank of New York, added approximately $15 million more. He was, in the spring of 1873, 78 years old. He was, by every defensible accounting, the wealthiest American who had ever lived to that date. He had 13 living children. Of those 13, by his own private assessment that survives in the family papers, exactly 1 had inherited his commercial faculties. The eldest son, William Henry, known in the family as Billy, was 52 years old. He had spent 23 years, between 1842 and 1865, on a farm in New Dorp, Staten Island, that the Commodore had purchased for him at the age of 21 as a kind of exile. The Commodore had judged him, at 21, to be soft, indecisive, and fitter to plough than to trade. He had been wrong. Cornelius Vanderbilt died at 10:55 a.m. on the morning of the 4th of January, 1877, in the second-floor bedroom of his three-story Greek Revival townhouse at 10 Washington Place in Manhattan. He was 82 years old. The cause of death, by the certificate signed by his attending physician, Dr. Jared Lindsley, was exhaustion, complicated by chronic disease of the bowels. His will, executed on the 9th of January, 1875, and amended by codicil on the 8th of November, 1876, was opened by the Surrogates Court of New York County on the 8th of January, 1877. The will, in its operative paragraphs, allocated the fortune as follows. To his eldest son, William Henry Vanderbilt, $95 million in stock, real estate, and cash. Approximately 95% of the entire estate. To William Henry's four sons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, William Kissam Vanderbilt, Frederick William Vanderbilt, and George Washington Vanderbilt II. A total of approximately $7.5 million in trust. To his other surviving son, Cornelius Jeremiah Vanderbilt, a life income trust of approximately $200,000 principal. To his 8 surviving daughters, collectively, approximately $500,000 total, distributed unequally. To his second wife, Frank Crawford Vanderbilt, a life income of $200,000 and the Washington Place house. By the standards of any prior American probate, the disparity was unprecedented. By the standards of the Vanderbilt family itself, it was a declaration. The Commodore had, in effect, designated William Henry as the sole continuator of the commercial enterprise. The remaining 10 children sued, jointly, on the 5th of March 1877. The lawsuit lasted 27 months. It was, in 1879, the longest-running probate contest in the history of the New York Surrogates Court. It would also, by every operational measurement that matters, be the moment the dispersion began. What few of the contesting heirs understood, when they filed their lawsuit on the 5th of March 1877, was the precise content of the 8th of November, 1876 codicil. The codicil was sealed in the probate file. It would be unsealed only at the trial itself, beginning on the 12th of November, 1877, in the Surrogates Court of New York County. The codicil, by the partial transcript that survives in the archived court file, CV 18772871, stated in its operative paragraph, "It is my will and intention that the principal of my estate shall pass entire and undivided to my son William Henry, with the express understanding, conveyed by me to him in private conversation and acknowledged by him on the dates hereafter, set forth that the protection and continuation of the property shall be his sole and exclusive obligation. I have made this provision because I believe and have always believed that wealth divided is wealth lost. Wealth divided is wealth lost." That single phrase, written in the Commodore's own hand, in the codicil that the contesting heirs would not see for 9 months, was the most accurate prediction of the family's coming century anyone in his immediate circle would ever make. He was wrong about William Henry being able to prevent it. He was right about everything else. In 8 years, William Henry Vanderbilt, the unwanted middle-aged son the Commodore had once exiled to a Staten Island farm, will double the fortune to $200 million and die at his Fifth Avenue desk of a stroke at age 64. In 16 years, his eldest son Cornelius II will commission, in Newport, the largest single private summer cottage ever built in the United States. The cottage will have 70 rooms. In 38 years, his fourth son George will die at age 51 in a Washington, D.C. hospital from complications of a routine appendectomy, leaving his widow with a 250-room chateau she cannot afford to staff. In 48 years, the Commodore's most spectacular grandson, will die in a Park Avenue apartment with debts of approximately $2.5 million, and a 4-year-old daughter who will become, in the headline of the New York Daily News on the 21st of October 1934, the poor little rich girl. Her name was Gloria. Between January 1877 and December 1885, William Henry Vanderbilt does the single most consequential thing any second-generation heir in American economic history has ever done. He doubles the fortune in 8 years. He inherits $95 million on the 4th of January 1877. He dies of a stroke at his desk at 640 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan on the afternoon of the 8th of December 1885. The estate at his death, by the inventory filed in the Surrogates Court of New York County in February 1886, is approximately $200 million equivalent, in modern purchasing power terms, to approximately $500 billion in 2026. He achieves this not by the speculative methods his father pioneered. He achieves it by operational discipline. He extends the New York Central Main Line. He acquires the Chicago and Northwestern. He extends the Lake Shore. He consolidates the freight rates across the entire Vanderbilt rail network at margins, and his competitors cannot match. He works, by his own statement to the New York Sun in 1882, 11 hours per day at the desk in his Manhattan office. He also, in late 1882, gives a single interview to a young reporter named John Dickinson, Sherman of the Chicago Tribune, that would become the most consequential public relations disaster in 19th-century American business history. Sherman, on the 8th of October 1882, asked William Henry whether the Postal Service should require railroads to carry mail at reduced rates as a public benefit. William Henry, leaning back in his chair in the New York Central executive car at the LaSalle Street Station in Chicago, replied, "The public be damned. I am working for my stockholders." The quote ran the following morning, the 9th of October 1882, on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. It was reprinted within 48 hours in approximately 300 newspapers across the United States. It defined William Henry Vanderbilt, and by extension, the entire dynasty for the next 150 years. He died 3 years and 2 months later. He had no public relations apparatus capable of reframing the quote. He never spoke publicly again. The trigger event for the Vanderbilt collapse was not the 1,877 will. It was not the 1,882, quote. It was not even the 1,885 stroke. It was the wedding of one of William Henry's grandsons, Cornelius Vanderbilt II's son, William Kissam, Vanderbilt's daughter Consuelo, on the 6th of November, 1895, at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The bride was 18 years old. The groom was Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, 24, the owner of Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, a 187-room Baroque country house that, by 1895, was structurally bankrupt. The Marlborough estates had been generating, by the Duke's own deposition, in the eventual 1921 annulment proceeding, an annual operating loss of approximately £40,000. The marriage settlement, negotiated by Consuelo's mother Alva Vanderbilt, and signed at the Vanderbilt Madison Avenue residence on the 19th of August 1895, transferred to the Duke of Marlborough. At the moment of the wedding ceremony, 50,000 shares of Beach Creek Railway preferred stock, with a par value of $2.5 million, approximately $90 million in modern purchasing power, an annual income of $100,000 guaranteed for the Duke's lifetime, and a single cash payment of $2,500,000 upon the consummation of the marriage. Consuelo Vanderbilt did not, by her own testimony in her 1953 memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, want to marry the Duke. She was in love, in the spring of 1895, with a Manhattan financier named Winthrop Rutherford, her mother Alva Vanderbilt, then 42, and the most aggressive society hostess in New York, had locked Consuelo in her bedroom at the Madison Avenue house for 3 days in May 1895 to break the engagement to Rutherford. By Consuelo's account, on the morning of the 6th of November 1895, dressed in a wedding gown of white satin and Brussels lace that had been delivered from the House of Worth in Paris, She sat in the carriage on Fifth Avenue, weeping for 40 minutes before she could be persuaded to walk into St. Thomas Church. She walked. She was given, at the altar, in a transaction that the New York Times described in its 7th of November 1895 front-page coverage as the wedding of the century. What few of the wedding guests understood, and what Consuelo herself did not learn until 1909, 14 years after the ceremony, was the operational consequence of the Marlborough settlement for the Vanderbilt fortune itself. Alva Vanderbilt had, in negotiating the settlement, exhausted approximately 38% of her husband's liquid capital position. William Kissam Vanderbilt had given his daughter to a structurally bankrupt British dukedom in exchange for nothing the family received in return, except a title that, by American law, his daughter could not pass to her children as American citizens. He had in effect paid $90 million in modern purchasing power terms for a parchment. The parchment hung, framed, in the entrance hall of his New York residence until his death in 1920. It was sold at auction, by his estate, in 1924, for $42. The descent begins not with a single decision, but with a single architectural commission executed by a single grandson of the Commodore in a single calendar year, 1893. The grandson was Cornelius Vanderbilt II. He was the eldest son of William Henry. He was, by the inheritance distribution of 1,885, the largest single recipient of the second-generation transfer, approximately $70 million in stock, real estate, and rail system controlling interest. He was 49 years old in 1893. He was, by every contemporary account, the most religiously serious, the most operationally disciplined, and the most personally austere of all the Commodore's grandsons. He attended St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church on Madison Avenue every Sunday. He neither drank nor gambled. He was, in the family's internal accounting, the heir most likely to perpetuate the discipline that had built the fortune. In the spring of 1893, he commissioned the architect Richard Morris Hunt, the most expensive American architect, then in practice, who had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, to construct a summer cottage on a 13-acre oceanfront parcel on Oka Point Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island. The cottage was to replace an earlier wood frame house on the same property that had burned in November 1892. The construction specifications, as set down in the final approved drawings of June 1893, called for 70 rooms, 6 floors above ground, 2 basement levels, an Italian Renaissance palazzo facade in Indiana limestone, a great hall rising 50 feet, mosaic floors imported from Italy, a kitchen wing capable of preparing meals for 200 guests simultaneously, 25 bathrooms, a railway siding for the delivery of construction materials directly to the property line, and a structural steel frame of the type used in the contemporary Manhattan office tower. The construction took 2 years. It employed, at peak, approximately 300 craftsmen, including a contingent of approximately 80 Italian stonecutters, whom Hunt had imported under contract from Carrara, Italy. The total construction cost, by the final accounting submitted to Cornelius II's estate office on the 14th of August, 1895, was $11,200,000. In modern purchasing power terms, approximately $360 million. The cottage was named The Breakers. It was occupied by the Cornelius II family, by the Newport season records, an average of 10 weeks per year, the period from approximately mid-June to early September for the next 4 summers, until Cornelius II's death from a stroke at age 55 on the 12th of September 1899. $11,200,000, divided across 40 weeks of total occupancy across 4 summers, comes to approximately $280,000 per week of actual residential use equivalent, in modern purchasing power terms, to approximately $9 million per week. For a summer house. The construction of the breakers consumed, by the rough internal Vanderbilt family office accounting that Arthur T. Vanderbilt, II, reconstructs in Fortune's Children, approximately 7% of the entire family fortune in 2 summer construction seasons. It was not the only mansion the family built that decade. It was not even the most expensive one. Between 1888 and 1895, the Commodore's grandchildren commissioned the construction of, in order of completion, Marble House, Newport, 1892, $11 million, William Kissam and Alva Vanderbilt. The Breakers, Newport, 1895, $11,200,000, Cornelius II. Belcourt Castle, Newport, 1894, $3 million, Alva's second husband, Oliver Belmont. Idle Hour, Oakdale, Long Island, 1,900, $2 million, William Kissam. The Petit Chateau, -6, 60, Fifth Avenue, Manhattan, 1,882, $3 million, William Kissam and Alva. 1 West 57th Street, Manhattan, 1,883, $3 million. Cornelius II eventually expanded in 1893 to 130 rooms at an additional cost of $4 million. And Biltmore House, Asheville, North Carolina, 1,895, $6 million in initial construction phase only. George Washington, Vanderbilt II. Total construction expenditure across the 7 properties. By Arthur T. Vanderbilt II's archival reconstruction, approximately $43 million between 1,882 and 1,900. In modern purchasing power terms, approximately $1.5 billion. This was the spend across only the 7 principal residences. It does not include the staff payrolls Cornelius II employed, at the Breakers alone, approximately 40 year-round servants. It does not include the European art acquisitions. It does not include the private rail cars. Each Vanderbilt brother owned at least one, custom-built at the Pullman Works in Chicago, at approximately $200,000 per car. It does not include the steam yachts, Cornelius II's North Star, William Kissam's Alva and successor Valiant. By the most defensible accounting, the third Vanderbilt generation spent between 1,882 and 1,900, approximately 28% of the principal fortune they had inherited. The fortune was no longer growing. It was being decorated. In 4 years, George Washington Vanderbilt II, the Commodore's youngest grandson, the most cultivated, the only one who had personally read every book in his library at Biltmore in 3 languages, will discover that the Asheville estate he completed in 1895 is consuming approximately $250,000 per year, operating costs and producing no income whatsoever. In 10 years, the New York Central Railroad, the operational engine that had funded the entire mansion-building decade, will begin its long structural decline as automobile manufacturing, refrigerated trucking, and aircraft freight begin, between 1908 and 1925, to systematically reduce the rail system's pricing power. In 30 years, on the evening of the 4th of March 1925, in a 16-room apartment on the 11th floor of 945 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, the youngest son of Cornelius II, the brother of the heir who built the Breakers, will sit at a card table at approximately 9:30 inches the evening, place a final bet, and lose the operational remainder of his branch of the family's portion of the fortune in a single hand of stud poker. He will be 45 years old. He will leave a 4-month-old daughter. Her name will be Gloria. To understand what destroys the Vanderbilt fortune across the 3rd and 4th generations, you have to understand a single architectural fact about the largest privately built house in American history. George Washington Vanderbilt II, the Commodore's youngest grandson, the 7th and final child of William Henry, was, in March 1888, 25 years old, unmarried, and the recipient of a recently increased trust distribution of approximately $10 million. He had been on a walking tour of the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina with his mother and a Boston physician named Dr. Samuel Westray Battle. He had, by his own letter to his architect Richard Morris, Hunt of June 1888, Biltmore Company, Corporate Records, letter the 12th of June 1888, become fixed upon the idea that no more ideal location for a country home could be found anywhere in America. The location was a 125,000-acre tract, approximately 5 times the area of Manhattan Island, south of Asheville, North Carolina. George Vanderbilt acquired it across the next 4 years through a sequence of more than 700 separate land purchases from individual Appalachian landowners. He paid an average of approximately $2 per acre. The total acquisition cost was approximately $250,000. The house he built on it cost $6 million in initial construction, negative $1,889, $1,895, and approximately $4 million additional in finishes, furnishings, art, library acquisitions, and grounds development through the next decade. The completed Biltmore House, formally opened on Christmas Eve, 1,895, consisted of 250 rooms across 4 above-ground floors and a basement service level. It required, at full operational staffing, approximately 80 year-round servants and an additional 40 seasonal staff. Its annual operating cost, by the Biltmore Company corporate records of $1,903, was approximately $250,000. In modern purchasing power terms, approximately $8 million per year. George Vanderbilt's annual income from his trust, by the same period's accounting, was approximately $800,000 per year. Biltmore was consuming, in operating costs alone, approximately 31% of his entire annual income. Before he ate, before he traveled, before he purchased a single book or a single canvas, he understood the math. He could not, by his own correspondence with his Wilmington attorney George Washington Pack of the 17th of November 1908, Vanderbilt University Special Collections, Container 14, close the house. It had been built into the side of a mountain on a 125,000-acre estate that had no commercial function. The land was forested with hardwood that had no nearby rail spur for export. The agricultural land was mostly unsuitable for the cash crops of the period. The estate's only revenue-generating activity was a small commercial dairy. He was, by 1908, attempting to monetize the forest through a then experimental concept his estate manager, Gifford Pinchot, had introduced from Germany: scientific forest management. Pinchot would go on, in 1905, to become the first chief of the United States Forest Service. The Biltmore Forest School he founded on the estate would become the first forestry school in the United States. The conceptual contribution to American conservation was historic. The financial contribution to the Vanderbilt fortune was approximately negative $200,000 per year for 15 years. George Washington Vanderbilt II died on the 6th of March 1914 at George Washington University Hospital in Washington, D.C., at the age of 51. The cause of death, by the certificate signed by his attending physician, Dr. Sterling Ruffin, was complications following appendectomy. The procedure had been performed on March 1. It had been, by the standards of 1914, routine. He left a widow, Edith Stuyvesant Dresser Vanderbilt, age 41, and a single daughter, Cornelia Stuyvesant Vanderbilt, age 14. He also left Biltmore House. He left it without an operating endowment. He left it with the agricultural and forestry operations Pinchot had established, but had not yet made profitable. He left it with a staff of 120 year-round and seasonal employees, whose wages required, in the year of his death, approximately $140,000 in cash payments. He left it with, by the inventory filed in the Buncombe County, North Carolina Probate Court on April 18, 1,914,87,000 acres of the original 125,000-acre purchase, still under family ownership. The remainder having been sold across the previous 9 years to support the estate's operating cash needs. He left, in liquid trust assets to support his widow and his daughter, approximately $5 million. The annual operating shortfall on Biltmore in 1914 was approximately $170,000. His widow Edith made a calculation, in the months between April and October, a 1,914, that no other Vanderbilt family member of any generation had been willing to make. She sold the land. In May 1914, by sale and deed records of the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, she sold 86,700 acres of the Biltmore Forest to the United States government for approximately $5 per acre, a total of approximately $435,000. The sale was negotiated through her late husband's former forestry administrator and made under the provisions of the Weeks Act of 1911. The 86,700 acres became the founding land base of the Pisgah National Forest, the first national forest in the eastern United States. What Edith had done, in May 1914, was the first defensive land disposal in the family's history. It was the first time any Vanderbilt had voluntarily reduced the family's holdings to support the survival of an operating asset. It was, by the standards of every prior Vanderbilt generation, a defeat. It was also, by every credible retrospective accounting, the single decision that preserved Biltmore House itself for the next century. The 86,700 acres had been the unmonetizable burden. The 8,000 acres Edith retained the immediate gardens, the home farm, the dairy operations, and the house itself were the operationally viable core. Edith, with her daughter Cornelia and Cornelia's eventual husband John Cecil, would convert that core into a commercial operation. Biltmore House opened to paid public tours on the 15th of March 1930. The family retains ownership of the property in 2026. It is the largest privately owned house in the United States. It receives approximately 1.4 million paying visitors per year. Edith Vanderbilt's defensive land sale of 1,914 is, by any defensible measurement, the single most successful financial decision of any Vanderbilt of any generation made between 1,885 and 1,973. She was the daughter-in-law. She had not been raised in the family. She did not believe wealth was a permission slip. She believed it was a balance sheet. The family did not in any meaningful sense learn from her example. What happens in the principal Vanderbilt branch, the line descending from Cornelius II, the builder of the breakers between 1899 and 1925, is the most operationally precise dispersion sequence in 19th century American dynasty history. Cornelius II died on the 12th of September, 1899. He left by the will executed on the 2nd of August 1896, an estate valued at approximately $72.5 million. He distributed it as follows. To his eldest surviving son, Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt, approximately $42 million in stock and real estate, and the controlling interest in the New York Central Directorship. To his other 4 surviving children, Gertrude Vanderbilt, Whitney, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, and Gladys Vanderbilt collectively, approximately $7.5 million each. To his widow, Alice Claypool Gwynn Vanderbilt, a life income, the New York residence at 1 West 57th Street, and the breakers. There was a particular reason Cornelius II had passed the principal share to his second son rather than his eldest. The eldest son, Cornelius Vanderbilt III, had married, in 1896, against his father's express wishes, a woman named Grace Wilson, whose family Cornelius II considered socially unsuitable. The disinheritance of the eldest, executed by the will of August 1896, was the second time in Vanderbilt history a dynasty patriarch had, by testamentary instrument, designated the inheritance line by personal preference rather than primogeniture. The first time had been the Commodore, in 1875, choosing William Henry over the contesting siblings. The second time was Cornelius II, in 1896, choosing Alfred over Cornelius III. Both decisions, by the operational logic of the family's commercial succession, were the correct decisions. The first one had succeeded, the second one had 16 years. Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt, the chosen heir, the second son, the railroad executive, the most operationally serious of his generation, boarded the RMS Lusitania at Pier 54 inches Manhattan on the morning of the 1st of May 1915, bound for Liverpool, traveling in stateroom B, 66 with his valet Ronald Denyer. He was 37 years old. He had inherited the Vanderbilt Railroad directorships 14 years earlier. He was, in the spring of 1915, the operational head of the New York Central system. The Lusitania was struck by a single torpedo from the German submarine U-20 at 2:10 p.m. On the 7th of May 1915, 11 nautical miles off the old head of Kinsale, on the southern coast of Ireland. The ship sank in 18 minutes. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt, by the testimony of his surviving valet, was last seen on the boat deck, handing his lifebelt to a young mother holding an infant. He could not swim. He was the third Vanderbilt of his generation to die before the age of 55. He was the only one of the operationally serious ones. There was no cover-up of what happened to Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt. There was simply a press apparatus that had, by the spring of 1925, lost interest in him. Reginald, the youngest brother of the dead Lusitania heir, the youngest son of Cornelius II, born in 1880, was, in the family's internal assessment, the structural opposite of his brother Alfred. He had inherited his $7.5 million from his father in 1899 at the age of 19. He had also inherited, by the trust's principal distribution clause, an additional $20 million on his 21st birthday, on the 14th of January 1901. He had spent it. By the rough internal accounting reconstructed in Fortune's Children, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt liquidated his entire principal inheritance, approximately $27.5 million, across the trust and the direct distribution between January 1901 and December 1923. The expenditures were principally in three categories. Thoroughbred horse breeding he owned, at peak, a stable of 140 horses at his Sandy Point farm in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, with an annual operating budget of approximately $200,000. High-stakes private gambling, poker, baccarat, and racetrack betting at the Saratoga, Belmont, and Aqueduct meets, and personal living expenses, on a scale that included a permanent suite at the Plaza Hotel, a 700-acre Rhode Island estate, a Manhattan townhouse at 12 East 77th Street, and a custom 156-foot steam yacht named Surprise. By December 1923, at age 43, he had reached the bottom of the original inheritance. He was reduced, in the final 18 months of his life, to drawing on the trust, principal protections his father had, structurally built into the 1,899 instrument protections that allowed him approximately $100,000 per year in irrevocable income, but did not permit further principal liquidation. He had, by 1924, married for the second time. His new wife was a 17-year-old debutante from Newport named Gloria Morgan. They had a daughter, also named Gloria, on the 20th of February 1924. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt was, by the pathology report attached to his death certificate of the 4th of September 1925, a chronic and severe alcoholic. His liver had cirrhosed. His esophageal varices had ruptured for the third documented time in 18 months. He died at his home, Sandy Point Farm, of internal hemorrhage at approximately 1:30 a.m. He left, to his 17-month-old daughter Gloria, a trust principal of $2.5 million, the entirety of what remained of his portion of the family fortune. He left, to his 19-year-old widow Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, debts of approximately $1 million and the responsibility for his daughter's care. The trust, by its structural terms, would distribute its income to the daughter Gloria's mother during Gloria's minority, approximately $125,000 per year, equivalent to approximately $2.25 million in modern purchasing power terms. The mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, was 19 years old. She had not, in any practical sense, ever held a paying job, managed a household budget, or completed a year of formal post-secondary education. She had, however, just become the trustee of one of the last operationally significant trust instruments in the principal Vanderbilt branch. Within 10 years, the disposition of that trust would become the single most covered American legal proceeding of the 1930s. The fallout from Reginald Vanderbilt's death, and from the trust he had left his daughter produced, between September 1934 and November 1934, the longest custody trial in American history to that date. The plaintiff was Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, Reginald's older sister, who had filed in New York Surrogate's Court on the 3rd of July 1934, a petition to remove the daughter Gloria, by then 10 years old, from the custody of her mother on grounds of moral unfitness. The grounds, by the petition, included the mother's lifestyle in Paris and the south of France, her relationships with several European male companions, and the alleged use of trust income for the mother's personal expenditures rather than the child's. The trial ran from September 28 to the 21st of November 1934. It was covered in the New York Daily News on every consecutive front page for 55 days. It coined in the Daily News headline of the 21st of October 1934 the phrase that would attach to the daughter Gloria for the next 85 years of her life: "The poor little rich girl." The court ruled, on the 21st of November 1934, in favor of the aunt, Gertrude Whitney. Gloria, the daughter, was placed in the custody of the aunt. Her mother was permitted weekend visitation and was removed from the trustee position. Gloria Vanderbilt was 10 years old. She had become, by every measure that mattered to American journalism in November 1934, the public face of the dynasty's collapse. Between 1934 and 1973, the Vanderbilt family's external presentation undergoes the most rapid status compression of any major American dynasty. The mansion liquidations come in 3 waves. The first wave, between 1925 and 1939, disposes of the principal Manhattan residences. The Petit Chateau, at 665th Avenue, William Kissam and Alva's $3 million 1,882 commission is demolished in 1926 to permit the construction of a commercial office building. 1 West 57th Street. Cornelius II's 130-room Manhattan residence, the largest private home ever built in New York City, is demolished in 1927. The site becomes, eventually, the Bergdorf Goodman department store. 6 45th Avenue. The William Henry Vanderbilt residence, in which the Commodore's eldest son had died at his desk, is demolished in 1947. The Grand Triple residence at 2 West 52nd Street, the structure that had been called, in the New York Herald, of 1,882, the most palatial private dwelling in America, is demolished in 1949. By 1950, of the 7 principal Vanderbilt residences in Manhattan that had stood between 1,882 and 1,900, exactly 0 remain. The second wave, between 1,940 and 1,962, disposes of the Long Island estates. Idle Hour, William Kissam's Oakdale country estate, is sold in 1948 and converted into the Adelphi University Extension campus. Eagle's Nest, the Centerport estate of William Kissam Vanderbilt II, is donated by its owner in 1944 to Suffolk County and operated thereafter as the Vanderbilt Museum and Planetarium. The third wave, between 1962 and 1972, disposes of the Newport cottages. Marble House Alva Vanderbilt's $11 million 1,892 commission, the property in which she had locked her daughter Consuelo in May 1895 to break the engagement to Winthrop Rutherford, is sold by Alva's son Harold Sterling Vanderbilt to the Preservation Society of Newport County in February 1963. The sale price, by the deed of conveyance recorded in the Newport City Clerk's office on the 14th of February 1963, is $1. $1. The same $1 I asked you to remember at the end of the cold open. The 70-room marble cottage, completed in 1895 at a construction cost of $11,200,000 in the Breakers case and $11 million in Marble House's case, occupied an average of 10 weeks per year by its original family. It was conveyed to a public preservation organization in February 1963 for the symbolic consideration of $1, because no Vanderbilt in any branch of the family in 1963 possessed either the liquid resources to operate the property or the inheritance to absorb its annual property tax assessment of approximately $50,000. The dollar was a face-saving construction. The property had become, in the operational accounting of the family, a liability the family could no longer carry. The Breakers itself, Cornelius II's $11,200,000 1,895 commission, was leased to the Preservation Society on the same dollar per year basis in 1948 and ultimately sold to the Society in 1972 for $365,000. The fourth Vanderbilt generation, the great-grandchildren of the Commodore, born between approximately 1900 and 1925, produces three figures whose lives define the dispersion's final operational phase. Cornelius Neely, Vanderbilt IV, the son of Cornelius III, the disinherited eldest, was born in 1898. He worked, beginning in 1919, as a journalist. He served as a private in the United States Army during the First World War. He published 7 books between 1925 and 1959, most of them slightly embarrassing memoirs of family life. By 1939, by his own account in Farewell to Fifth Avenue, negative $1,935, his liquid net worth was approximately $80,000. He died in 1,974 inches, Reno, Nevada, having lived for the last 20 years of his life in a series of rented apartments. He was buried in a public cemetery in Reno. There was no Vanderbilt family attendance. William Kissam Vanderbilt II, the only son of William Kissam and Alva from their first marriage, inherited approximately $10 million from his father in 1920. He spent it across 2 decades on yacht racing. He was the principal financier of the United States defense of the America's Cup in 1934, and on automobile racing, which he himself had pioneered in America with the Vanderbilt Cup races on Long Island between 1904 and 1916. He died in 1944 of a heart attack at age 66. His centerport, Long Island Estate, Eagle's Nest, was donated to Suffolk County in his will. There was no operational endowment. The county absorbed the operating cost into its parks and recreation budget. Gloria Vanderbilt, the daughter of Reginald, the niece of Gertrude Whitney, the subject of the 1934 custody trial, would live 95 years and become, in her own right, the most commercially successful self-made designer of any Vanderbilt of any generation. She launched, in 1976, the Gloria Vanderbilt jeans brand, which was sold under license through the 1980s and 1990s and produced approximately $200 million in cumulative royalty income. She also, between 1985 and 1995, lost approximately 80% of those earnings to a financial advisor who was eventually convicted of tax fraud against her and other clients. She declared a personal financial loss of approximately $1.5 million in tax returns filed in 1992. She continued working into her 90th decade. She died in June 2019 at age 95. Her son, born December 1967, the son of her 4th marriage, to the screenwriter Wyatt Cooper, was Anderson Cooper. He inherited from his mother, by his own statement in his 2021 book, Vanderbilt, The Rise and Fall of an American Dynasty, Harper, 2021, approximately $1.5 million. He has stated repeatedly, in interviews going back to 2014, that he received from his mother explicitly the message that there would be no inheritance and that he would need to support himself entirely on the basis of his own earnings. Anderson Cooper is, in 2026, the only living direct lineal descendant of Cornelius Vanderbilt who is widely recognized in American public life. He achieved that recognition not as a Vanderbilt but as a working journalist for CNN. The fortune the Commodore had built across 63 working years had passed through 6 generations and produced, in its sole continuing famous heir, a man whose income derives from a salaried position at a television network. The reunion that opens this video, the gathering of 120 Vanderbilt descendants in the Memorial Gymnasium of Vanderbilt University on the afternoon of October 14, 1973, was organized by a great-great-granddaughter of the Commodore named Emily Vanderbilt Hammond Wadhams. She had spent 2 years, between 1971 and 1973, tracking down the surviving members of the line. She had located, by her final tally submitted to Vanderbilt University's Alumni Office on the 29th of September 1973, 472 living lineal descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt distributed across 34 states and 7 countries. Of those 472, exactly 120 attended. The reunion was held at Vanderbilt University because the university, founded in 1873 by the Commodore himself with a $1 million founding gift, the only major philanthropic act of his commercial life, was the only Vanderbilt-named institution in the United States. The family could enter, en masse, without paying entry fees. The Breakers required a paid public tour ticket. Marble House required a paid public tour ticket. Biltmore required a paid public tour ticket. Vanderbilt University did not. The combined liquid net worth of the 120 Vanderbilts in the Memorial Gymnasium that afternoon, by Wadham's confidential estimate prepared for the Nashville Banner coverage of October 17, 1973, was approximately $12 million, distributed across 120 households. The average per household figure was approximately $100,000, a figure consistent with the upper-middle-class American household balance sheet of 1,973, but unrecognizable from the standard the same family had set in 1885. By the speeches recorded in the gymnasium that afternoon, and by the Nashville Banner account of the 15th of October in 1973, not a single attendee made any reference to the Breakers, Marble House, Biltmore, the Petit Chateau, the New York Central Railroad, or the Commodore's January 1875 will. The reunion proceeded as an ordinary American family gathering. There was a buffet. There were name tags. There was a slideshow, organized by Wadham's, of vintage family photographs, most of them taken at properties the family no longer owned. There was no toast offered to the founder. There was no commemoration of the date. The 14th of October, 1973, fell exactly 96 years and 9 months after the Commodore's death on the 4th of January, 1877. The dispersion was, by every operational standard, complete. Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877 with a fortune equivalent to 1 out of every $9 in the United States economy. By 1973, 96 years and 9 months later, his approximately 700 living direct descendants combined could not, between them, assemble enough liquid capital to repurchase any single one of the 7 principal residences his grandchildren had built. The fortune had not been confiscated. It had not been taxed away. It had not been lost to war, revolution, depression, or fraud. It had been spent. By the operational decisions of the founder's own children and grandchildren, in conditions of unbroken peace, at a rate of approximately $2.1 million per year for 65 years. The math, in retrospect, was straightforward. 6 generations. 1 man builds. 1 son doubles. 8 grandchildren spend. 40 great-grandchildren disperse. Several hundred great-great-grandchildren forget. The Vanderbilt pattern is the foundational pattern of American dynasty collapse, the pattern against which every subsequent dynasty in this series has been, implicitly or explicitly, measured. It is not the Kennedy pattern, where the fortune produced operational permissions that killed the heirs. It is not the Duke pattern, where the line ran out of biological successors. It is not the Rockefeller redirection, where philanthropic discipline preserved both the fortune and the family. It is not the Post pattern, where one daughter built more than her father and died alone. The Vanderbilt pattern is, simply, the pattern of a fortune that the second generation believed had been built for them to spend. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, the man who at 16 plowed his mother's 8 acres in 28 days for $100 in silver, understood. By the date, he executed the codicil of the 8th of November, 1876, exactly what was about to happen. The phrase he wrote into the codicil, "Wealth divided is wealth lost," was not a sentiment. It was, by every operational measurement of the fortune's eventual trajectory, a mathematical prediction. He was right. He was simply, in the same instrument, wrong about the one thing necessary for the prediction not to come true. He believed William Henry Vanderbilt could prevent the division. William Henry could not. William Henry doubled the fortune across his 8 working years and then, by the will he signed on the 11th of June 1885, divided it almost equally among his 8 surviving children. The codicil instinct of the founder did not, in the second generation, transmit. The 8 children of William Henry Cornelius II, William Kissam, Frederick, George, Margaret, Emily, Florence, Eliza each received an inheritance of approximately $10 to $40 million. None of them inherited the operational discipline that had created the inheritance. They inherited instead the receipts. What does the story of the Vanderbilt family ultimately mean? It means, first, that the founder's instinct about division wealth divided is wealth lost is the single most empirically validated proposition in American dynasty history. Every subsequent fortune that has survived in any operationally meaningful sense across more than 3 generations, Rockefeller, DuPont, Mellon, Pew, has done so by structuring trust instruments and family office governance specifically to prevent the division. Cornelius Vanderbilt feared, and his son William Henry permitted. Every fortune that has not done so, Vanderbilt itself, the principal Astor branch, the Pulitzer family, the Hearst family in its wider lineal distribution, has dispersed at approximately the Vanderbilt curve. It means, second, that the third-generation expression of an inherited fortune is, in conditions of social competition and the absence of operational discipline, almost mathematically certain to take the form of architectural display. The Newport Mansion building decade of 1888 to 1900 is not unique to the Vanderbilts. It is the same pattern that produced Lyndhurst, Whitehall, and Stan Highway Hall in the same decade for parallel American fortunes. The architecture is not the cause of the dispersion. The architecture is the third-generation symptom of the absence of structural prevention. The Newport cottages did not destroy the Vanderbilt fortune. They simply displayed, in 70-room marble form, the absence of the discipline that would have prevented the destruction. And it means, third, that there is a precise mathematical curve under which any fortune dissipates without the application of structural protection. Approximately 70% erosion across each generational handoff in conditions of ordinary peacetime expenditure. The Commodore's fortune was approximately $100 million in 1877. Cornelius II's death in 1899 left approximately $72.5 million in his branch, the largest of the third-generation branches, which is precisely on the 70% retention curve, from his father's distribution to him. By the 4th generation, Reginald's branch retains approximately $2.5 million from a starting point of $27.5. The curve is consistent. The curve is, in retrospect, the operational signature of a family that did not adopt the Rockefeller model. The Commodore was right. Wealth divided is wealth lost. The only way to prevent the loss is to refuse, at the trust instrument level, to permit the division. The Vanderbilts permitted it. The fortune is gone. Drive south from the Newport Bridge on Bellevue Avenue, past the Newport Country Club, past the corner of Narragansett Avenue. Continue past the entrance gates of Rosecliff, of Beechwood, of Marble House. At the southeast corner of Oka Point Avenue and Shepherd Avenue, on a 13-acre oceanfront parcel rising approximately 70 feet above the cliff walk, you will see a wrought iron gate set into a limestone wall. The gate was installed, in essentially its present form, in 1895. Beyond the gate, set on the cliff walk facing the Atlantic, is the cottage called the Breakers. It is a 70-room Italian Renaissance palazzo of Indiana limestone, 6 floors above ground, 2 basement levels, a great hall 50 feet high, 25 bathrooms, mosaic floors, imported from Carrara, Italy. It was completed in 1895 at a construction cost of $11,200,000. It was sold by the family to the Preservation Society of Newport County in 1972 for $365,000. It is open today to the paying public. Adult admission, by the Preservation Society's 2026 ticket schedule, is approximately $29. It receives, by the Society's published figures, approximately 450,000 visitors per year. The third-floor bedrooms, the bedrooms in which Cornelius II's 7 children slept during the family's 10-week summer occupancies between 1895 and 1,899 are open as part of the standard tour. The personal effects of the family are not. The personal effects, by the negotiated terms of the 1,972 sale, were retained by the Vanderbilt heirs and dispersed across the family at the time of the conveyance. In a glass-fronted cabinet on the second-floor landing, between the Great Hall and the family wing, is a single document under preservation glass. It is a single sheet of cream-colored paper. The handwriting, in dark brown ink, is Cornelius Vanderbilt's, the Commodores, the founders. The document is dated the 8th of November, 1876. Visitors, on the standard tour, walk past the cabinet without stopping. The docents, by the Preservation Society's standard tour script, do not mention the document. It is the codicil. So we return, one final time, to the question we asked in the cold open. How does a single American family go, in 96 years, from owning approximately $1 out of every $9 in the United States economy to a family reunion in 1973, at which the most prosperous attendee is a Manhattan dentist? The answer is that the founder, on the 8th of November 1876, 8 weeks before his death, wrote into a codicil the precise sentence that would have prevented the dispersion if the second and third generations had read it as instruction rather than as testamentary preference. Wealth divided is wealth lost. The Commodore did not write the sentence as a sentiment. He wrote it as a financial proposition. The proposition was correct. The proposition was operationally testable. The proposition was, across the next 96 years, tested and confirmed. The Vanderbilts did not lose their fortune through misfortune. They lost it by reading the founder's most accurate prediction as a private personal opinion rather than as the operational doctrine he intended it to be. The fortune was a balance sheet. The family read it as a permission slip. The fortune is gone. The codicil is in a glass cabinet on the second-floor landing of a building the family no longer owns. The 70-room marble cottage in Newport, Rhode Island, completed in the summer of 1895 at a construction cost of $11 million, conveyed to a public preservation organization in February 1963 for the symbolic consideration of $1. The codicil Cornelius Vanderbilt wrote in his own hand on the 8th of November, 1876, 8 weeks before his death, the document containing the 7-word sentence that was, by every retrospective accounting, the single most accurate prediction any American patriarch ever made about his own dynasty's future. The wedding ceremony at St. Thomas Church. On the morning of the 6th of November, 1895, the 18-year-old bride weeping for 40 minutes in the carriage on Fifth Avenue before walking into the church to be transferred, with $90 million of family capital, to a structurally bankrupt British dukedom in exchange for a parchment that her father's estate would auction in 1924 for $42. 3 documents, 3 transactions, 3 generations. In each case, the Vanderbilt fortune was operationally present at the moment of the dispersion. In each case, the fortune did not cause the dispersion. The choice to spend rather than to preserve caused the dispersion. The distinction is the entire thesis of this video. The Vanderbilt fortune at Cornelius Vanderbilt's death in 1877 was approximately $100 million, equivalent in modern purchasing power terms to approximately $200 billion. The combined liquid net worth of the 120 Vanderbilts, who attended the family reunion in October 1973, was approximately $12 million. Cornelius Vanderbilt is buried in the family vault at the Moravian Cemetery on Staten Island. William Henry Vanderbilt is buried in the same vault. Cornelius II is buried in the same vault. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt's body was never recovered from the Lusitania. Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt is buried at the family plot in Newport. Gloria Vanderbilt is buried beside her son, Carter Vanderbilt Cooper, at the Vanderbilt family plot. Anderson Cooper, the only living direct descendant of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who is widely recognized in American public life, anchors a nightly news program on a cable network. The fortune is gone. The line continues. It is, finally, just a family. On the afternoon of the 14th of October 1973, In the Memorial Gymnasium of Vanderbilt University in Nashville, 120 direct descendants of Cornelius Vanderbilt, the founder of what was, in his lifetime, the largest single private fortune in the history of the United States, gathered for the first family reunion the dynasty had ever held. The reunion had been organized by a great-great-granddaughter who had spent 2 years tracking down the surviving members of the line. The location was Vanderbilt University, because it was the only Vanderbilt-named institution any of them could still afford to enter without paying admission. Among the 120 descendants in the gymnasium that afternoon, by the family's own internal census, there was not a single millionaire. His name was Cornelius Vanderbilt. He was known throughout his lifetime as the Commodore. He died on the 4th of January, 1877, with a personal fortune equivalent by Edward Renahan's calibration in Commodore -2007 to approximately $1 out of every $9 then in circulation in the United States. In modern purchasing power terms, roughly $200 billion. 96 years and 9 months later, his approximately 700 living direct descendants combined could not, between them, assemble enough liquid capital to repurchase any single one of the 7 principal residences his grandchildren had built. This is the full story of the Vanderbilt collapse, from the morning of the 2nd of May, 1810, when a 16-year-old Staten Island farm boy opened a passenger ferry between Stapleton and the Whitehall Street slip in Lower Manhattan with $100 in silver borrowed from his mother, to the morning of the 14th of February 1963, when Marble House Alva Vanderbilt's $11 million 1,892 commission was conveyed to the Preservation Society of Newport County for the symbolic consideration of $1. We trace every documented decision. The codicil Cornelius Vanderbilt added to his will on the 8th of November, 1876, containing the 7 words that predicted the entire collapse. The November 6th, 1,895 wedding at St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue that transferred $90 million in modern purchasing power terms to a structurally bankrupt British dukedom in exchange for a parchment. The construction of the breakers in 1893 to 1895 at a cost equivalent to 7% of the entire family fortune. The May 1914 land sale that saved Biltmore, and the evening of March 4th, 1925, in a 16-room apartment on the 11th floor of 945 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, that ended the principal Vanderbilt branch permanently. The thesis is not that the Vanderbilts were unlucky. The thesis is that the founder, on the 8th of November, 1876, 8 weeks before his death, wrote the precise sentence that would have prevented the dispersion. His own children read it as a sentiment. It was a mathematical prediction. Across the next 96 years, the prediction was tested and confirmed. Wealth divided is wealth lost. Every name, date, dollar figure, and quoted line in this documentary is sourced. Full bibliography in the comments.